The gleaming glass towers of Chin Technologies pierced the San Francisco skyline like crystal daggers, each floor a testament to human innovation and ambition. On the 47th floor, in a boardroom that cost more than most people's homes, David Chin sat alone at a mahogany table built for 20, staring at documents that spelled the end of everything he had built. At 42, David had been the golden boy of Silicon Valley, his boyish face gracing magazine covers from Forbes to Wired. His quantum AI technology had revolutionized everything from medical diagnostics to space exploration. Chin Technologies, valued at $8.2 billion just 6 months ago, employed over 15,000 people across 3 continents. Now, 47 floors below in the building's basement, 68-year-old Samuel Washington pushed his mop bucket down the sterile corridors, just as he had every night for the past 15 years. His weathered hands, marked by decades of honest labor, gripped the mop handle with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything in his life. The security cameras never lingered on him. The late-night workers never saw him. To the world above, Samuel Washington was invisible. Nobody expected the miracle to come from the basement. When tech billionaire David Chin lost everything in a single day, his fortune, his company, his family's trust, the only person willing to help him was the 68-year-old janitor who'd been invisible to him for 15 years. What happened next would transform both their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible transformation story, I want to know, have you ever been underestimated because of your job or background? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. If you believe that everyone has hidden potential regardless of their current situation, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about unlikely heroes who changed everything. Now, let's see how a janitor's wisdom saved an empire. The betrayal had come from the person David trusted most. Marcus Liu, his co-founder and best friend since MIT, had systematically stolen Chin Technologies' most valuable asset, the Prometheus AI algorithm. For 18 months, Marcus had been secretly copying code, duplicating research, and preparing to launch his own company with technology that had taken David 8 years to develop. The lawsuit papers scattered across David's desk told a devastating story. Liu Industries claimed that David had stolen their intellectual property, not the other way around. Somehow, Marcus had managed to file patents 6 months before David, making it appear that Chin Technologies was the thief. The legal documents were supported by forged emails, manipulated timestamps, and testimony from engineers David had trusted. Mr. Chen? The voice belonged to Patricia Hoffman, David's head of legal affairs for the past 6 years. She stood in the doorway of the boardroom, her usually confident demeanor replaced by something David had never seen before: defeat. The board has made their decision. David looked up from the papers, his eyes bloodshot from 3 days without sleep. And? Patricia moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. They're voting you out. Effective immediately. Marcus has convinced them that keeping you as CEO during the lawsuit is too risky for company value. The words hit David like physical blows. 15 years, he whispered. I built this company from nothing. I mortgaged my parents' house to afford our first office. I know, Patricia said softly. I'm sorry, David. I really am. But there's more. She placed another document on the table. Your personal assets are being frozen pending the outcome of the lawsuit. Your accounts, your stock options, your house in Palo Alto. Everything. David stared at the asset freeze order, signed by Judge Harrison Blackwell. In the span of 72 hours, he had gone from billionaire to broke. The house where he'd planned to raise children, the cars in his garage, even his late father's watch, all of it now belonged to the legal system until Marcus Liu's claims could be resolved. How long? David asked. Best case scenario? 2 years. Worst case. Patricia didn't finish the sentence. As Patricia left, David remained alone in the boardroom that had hosted celebrations of every major company milestone. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now locked out of his own building, reduced to gathering personal items under security escort like a common criminal. The glass walls that had once made him feel on top of the world now felt like a fishbowl, exposing his humiliation to anyone who cared to look. In the reflection, David saw not the confident CEO who had been featured on magazine covers, but a broken man whose life's work had been stolen by his closest friend. 47 floors below, Samuel Washington had observed it all. Not because he was nosy or gossiped with other employees, but because 15 years of night shift work had taught him to pay attention to patterns. He'd noticed the unusual number of late-night meetings in recent months. He'd seen Marcus Liu access David's office multiple times when David was traveling. He'd observed the subtle changes in employee behavior, the worried conversations that stopped when management passed by. Samuel had worked in corporate America long enough to recognize the signs of a hostile takeover, even when it came disguised as a friendship betrayal. What troubled him most wasn't the corporate maneuvering itself, but the familiar pattern of a good man being destroyed by those he trusted. As Samuel mopped the executive floor that night, he could see David still sitting in the boardroom at 2:17 a.m., surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups. The young man who had never acknowledged Samuel's presence in 15 years looked utterly alone, and something in Samuel's chest tightened with recognition. Samuel Washington had been invisible for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Born in 1955 in rural Alabama, he'd been the first in his family to attend college, earning a full scholarship to study aerospace engineering at Tuskegee University. His professors called him brilliant. His classmates respected his quiet intensity and problem-solving abilities. After graduation, Samuel had been recruited by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one of only 3 black engineers in a department of over 200. For 12 years, he'd worked on satellite communication systems, contributing to projects that put weather satellites in orbit and helped NASA communicate with deep space missions. But in 1989, Samuel had made the mistake of discovering irregularities in a defense contractor's billing practices. The contractor was overcharging NASA by millions of dollars for substandard components, compromising mission safety to increase profits. Samuel had documented everything meticulously and reported it through proper channels. Instead of being praised for his diligence, Samuel found himself accused of falsifying records and attempted theft of classified materials. The same supervisors who had once praised his work suddenly questioned his competence. Colleagues who had sought his advice began avoiding him in hallways. The trial was swift and decisive. With no physical evidence of the actual fraud he'd uncovered and a legal team that seemed more interested in protecting the contractor than seeking truth, Samuel was convicted of misconduct and blacklisted from the aerospace industry. His security clearance was revoked. His professional reputation was destroyed. At 34 years old, Samuel had found himself unemployable in the field he loved, supporting a wife and young daughter with whatever work he could find. The janitorial position at Chin Technologies had been a blessing when it came along in 2008, steady work with benefits, enough to keep food on the table and his daughter Maya in college. Now, 15 years later, Samuel had watched David Chin build something remarkable. Unlike many tech CEOs who treated service staff like furniture, David had always been polite, even if he'd never really seen Samuel as a person. Samuel had observed David's genuine care for his employees, his ethical approach to business decisions, and his innovative mind that solved problems others couldn't even understand. Watching David's destruction felt personal to Samuel, like seeing his younger self being crushed by forces too powerful to fight. The difference was that Samuel now possessed something he hadn't had at 34, patience, perspective, and most importantly, detailed knowledge of how corporate sabotage actually worked. As Samuel finished mopping the executive floor, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of heading to the service elevator as usual, he knocked gently on the boardroom door. David looked up, surprised to see anyone at this hour. Through the glass, he saw an elderly black man in a maintenance uniform, someone who seemed vaguely familiar but whom David realized he'd never actually spoken to. "Come in," David said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Samuel entered slowly, leaving his mop and bucket in the hallway. Up close, David could see the intelligence in the older man's eyes, a sharpness that seemed incongruous with his humble uniform. Mr. Chen, Samuel said, his voice carrying the educated cadence of someone who had once commanded respect in corporate boardrooms. I'm Samuel Washington. I've been cleaning this building for 15 years. David nodded, uncertain why the janitor was introducing himself at 2:30 in the morning. Samuel gestured toward the documents scattered across the table. I couldn't help but notice you've been working late these past few weeks. Forgive me for presuming, but you look like a man who's fighting for his life. Something in Samuel's tone made David really look at him for the first time. The janitor's posture was straight, dignified. His speech was articulate, professional. Most surprisingly, his eyes held the kind of understanding that came from personal experience with injustice. I am, David admitted. Fighting for my life, I mean. Everything I've built is being taken away by someone I trusted. Samuel nodded slowly. Marcus Liu. David's eyes widened. How do you? I've worked night shifts in corporate buildings for decades, Mr. Chen. I see patterns. I notice when people access offices they shouldn't, when meetings happen at unusual hours, when someone's behavior changes in subtle ways. Samuel moved closer to the table, studying the legal documents with an engineer's eye. What Mr. Liu has done to you? I've seen it before. David leaned forward, suddenly alert despite his exhaustion. What do you mean? Samuel's expression grew distant, remembering. 34 years ago, I was an aerospace engineer at NASA. I discovered fraud in a defense contracting scheme. When I reported it, I was framed for the very crimes I was trying to expose. Lost my career, my reputation, everything. David stared at this janitor who spoke with the precision of someone educated in complex systems, who understood corporate betrayal from personal experience. You were an engineer? Aerospace engineering, Tuskegee University, class of 77. 12 years at JPL before they destroyed me. Samuel's voice carried no bitterness, only factual recounting. I've spent 25 years watching, learning, understanding how these systems really work. And Mr. Chen, what's happening to you isn't just theft. It's systematic destruction designed to look legitimate. David felt something shift inside him, a spark of hope he hadn't felt in days. You think you understand what Marcus is doing? Samuel picked up one of the legal documents, scanning it with the quick comprehension of someone who had once read technical specifications for spacecraft. Patent filing manipulation, forged digital timestamps, coordinated testimony from compromised employees. It's sophisticated, but it follows predictable patterns. He set down the document and looked directly at David. The question is, are you willing to fight back with someone the system has already written off? Because Mr. Chen, you're going to need help from someone they'll never see coming. David studied Samuel's face, seeing past the uniform to the sharp intelligence beneath. For 15 years, this man had been invisible, observing, learning, understanding the very building and company that David thought he knew completely. Now, with his back against the wall and his fortune destroyed, David realized that the most valuable ally he could have was someone who had never been part of the system that was now trying to crush him. What would you need? David asked. Samuel smiled for the first time since entering the room. Access to what I've already been watching for 15 years, and a chance to show you what someone really sees when they've been invisible long enough. As the clock struck 3 a.m. in the empty boardroom, an unlikely partnership was born between a fallen billionaire and the janitor who had been waiting 3 decades for another chance at justice. Neither man knew that their collaboration would expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond Marcus Liu's betrayal, or that the miracle Samuel was about to perform would transform not just David's company, but the entire way corporate America treated the people it had always overlooked. The next morning, David met Samuel at a 24-hour diner in Oakland, far from the glass towers and Silicon Valley power brokers who had once defined David's world. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, David in his $1,000 suit looking haggard and defeated, Samuel in his simple work clothes radiating quiet confidence. Before we go any further, Samuel said, sliding a worn manila folder across the Formica table, you need to understand what you're really up against. David opened the folder to find detailed notes, photographs taken with an old digital camera, and printouts of documents he'd never seen before. Samuel had been documenting suspicious activities at Chin Technologies for the past 18 months, creating a timeline of Marcus Liu's systematic infiltration and theft. "How did you get these?" David asked, studying photographs of Marcus accessing server rooms and copying files. "I clean every office in that building, Mr. Chen. I have keycards to every door, access to every floor. But more importantly, I'm invisible. People have conversations around me like I'm not there. They leave sensitive documents on desks because they forget I can read." Samuel's expression was matter-of-fact. Being underestimated has its advantages. David felt a mix of admiration and guilt. For 15 years, he had been one of those people who treated Samuel as invisible, never considering that the man cleaning his office might be observing, analyzing, understanding corporate dynamics with the trained eye of someone who had once worked at the highest levels of aerospace engineering. "This timeline," David said, pointing to Samuel's handwritten notes, "it shows Marcus started planning this almost 2 years ago. The systematic copying of your quantum AI algorithms began exactly 23 months ago," Samuel confirmed. "But the real preparation started even earlier. He's been building relationships with key board members, placing allies in strategic positions, creating financial partnerships that would support his eventual takeover." Samuel opened a second folder, revealing what looked like a complex organizational chart. "This isn't just theft, Mr. Chen. It's a hostile acquisition disguised as intellectual property litigation. Marcus doesn't just want your technology, he wants your entire company." David studied the chart, seeing connections between board members, investors, and Marcus's new company that he had never recognized. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've lived through this before," Samuel said simply. "The patterns are always the same. Isolate the target, undermine their credibility, create legal complications that drain resources, then move in for acquisition when they're too weak to fight back." For the first time since the lawsuit began, David felt like he understood the scope of what he was facing. "So what do we do?" Samuel's eyes hardened with determination. "We give them what they're not expecting, resistance from someone they can't see, can't threaten, and can't discredit because I've already been discredited." He leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, they're fighting you in boardrooms and courtrooms where they control the rules. But I know places in your own building where truth lives that they've never thought to look." As they planned their counterattack, David began to see Samuel not as the janitor who had cleaned his office for 15 years, but as the brilliant engineer he had always been, someone whose career had been destroyed by the same type of systematic corporate betrayal that was now targeting David. The miracle wasn't going to be supernatural. It was going to be the power of someone society had overlooked finally getting the chance to show what he could do when someone with resources was willing to listen. Their war for Chin Technologies was about to begin. Over the next 3 weeks, Samuel and David's partnership evolved into something neither man could have predicted. Working from David's cramped studio apartment in Oakland, all he could afford after his assets were frozen, they began building a case that would expose the full scope of Marcus Liu's conspiracy. Samuel's access to Chin Technologies proved invaluable in ways David had never imagined. Every night after the building emptied, Samuel would use his keycard to access servers, photograph documents, and gather evidence that Marcus's legal team assumed was safely hidden. But Samuel's real advantage wasn't just physical access, it was his invisibility. "They have a meeting every Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the executive conference room," Samuel told David, showing him photographs taken through the glass walls. "Marcus, 3 board members, and someone I don't recognize." David studied the images. "That's Jonathan Hayes from Meridian Ventures. They're one of our biggest investors." His face darkened. "They're planning this right in my own building." Samuel nodded. "The advantage of being invisible is that people forget you have ears. And Mr. Chen, what I've been hearing would shock you." That evening, Samuel placed a small recording device behind the conference room's AV equipment, a location only someone who cleaned every inch of the room would know existed. What they captured over the following weeks was devastating: explicit discussions of market manipulation, plans to short Chin Technologies stock before the lawsuit became public, in coordination with competitors to divide up David's client base. But the most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source. During one recorded meeting, Marcus revealed that he had help from inside the patent office itself. Thomas Brennan, a senior patent examiner, had been paid $200,000 to backdate Marcus's filings and delay David's patent applications. "This is criminal conspiracy," David said, listening to the recording for the third time. "We have them." Samuel's expression remained cautious. "We have evidence, but we need a way to present it that can't be dismissed or buried. Remember, Mr. Chen, these people have resources and connections. They'll attack the messenger if they can't attack the message." It was then that Samuel revealed the full extent of his strategic thinking. For the past month, he had been creating multiple copies of all evidence, storing them in locations throughout the city. More importantly, he had been building a network of allies within Chin Technologies, other service workers, security guards, and administrative staff who had observed unusual activities but had never been asked their opinions. Maria Santos in accounting noticed unusual expense reports, Samuel explained, showing David a file folder thick with documentation. James Wright in security saw Marcus accessing servers after hours. Patricia in HR was asked to prepare employee files for people who weren't being terminated. "They're all willing to testify." David was amazed. "How did you convince them to help?" Samuel smiled. "I didn't convince them of anything. I just listened to their concerns and took them seriously. People who work service jobs see everything, Mr. Chen. We just rarely get asked what we've seen." The breakthrough came when Samuel discovered Marcus's fatal mistake. In his eagerness to establish earlier patent dates, Marcus had created a paper trail that contradicted his own technical knowledge. The quantum AI algorithms he claimed to have developed required understanding of advanced mathematics that Marcus had never studied. "Look at this," Samuel said, spreading out university transcripts and technical documents on David's small kitchen table. Marcus failed advanced calculus twice at MIT. But the algorithms he's claiming to have written require tensor calculus and quantum field theory. He couldn't have developed this technology himself. David examined the evidence, his engineering mind immediately grasping the implications. The mathematical signatures are all wrong. The coding style, the problem-solving approach, it's completely different from anything Marcus ever wrote in college. Samuel nodded. "Which means he not only stole your work, but he's committed perjury in claiming he developed it independently." As they prepared to present their evidence, David received an unexpected call from his estranged sister, Linda Chin Morrison. Linda was a federal prosecutor in the Northern District of California, and their relationship had been strained since their father's death 5 years earlier. "David," Linda said, her voice professional but concerned. "I've been following your situation in the news. I want you to know that my office has been monitoring some unusual trading activity around Chin Technologies stock. We suspect market manipulation." David felt a surge of hope. "Linda, I have evidence of exactly that. But I need guarantees that it will be taken seriously." The meeting was arranged for the following day at the Federal Building in San Francisco. David arrived with Samuel, carrying boxes of evidence that represented weeks of meticulous investigation. The contrast was striking, David in his best remaining suit, Samuel in his simple work clothes, both carrying documents that could topple a corporate conspiracy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Linda Chin Morrison greeted them in a sterile conference room, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Her expression was professional, but David could see surprise in her eyes when Samuel began speaking with the technical precision of someone who understood both engineering principles and corporate finance. "Mr. Washington," Agent Rebecca Torres said after Samuel had presented their timeline of evidence, "your background is impressive. Why haven't you been working in engineering?" Samuel's answer was simple and devastating. "Because 34 years ago, I made the mistake of reporting fraud to the wrong people. I was framed, convicted, and blacklisted. I've been cleaning buildings ever since." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Agent Torres exchanged glances with her partner before speaking again. "Mr. Washington, Would you be willing to work with us officially? Your insights into corporate fraud patterns could be invaluable. Over the next 2 weeks, Samuel found himself in the surreal position of briefing federal agents on corporate espionage techniques while still reporting for his night shift at Chin Technologies. The FBI had decided to keep his involvement secret, allowing him to continue gathering evidence while they built their case. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal agents discovered that Marcus Liu's conspiracy extended far beyond Chin Technologies. Using Samuel's insights into corporate fraud patterns, they uncovered a network of patent theft, market manipulation, and regulatory corruption that involved dozens of companies and government officials. But Marcus's allies weren't passive. As news of the federal investigation leaked, David and Samuel found themselves facing increasingly desperate countermeasures. David's apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Samuel's daughter Maya, now a successful architect in Chicago, received threatening calls. Security cameras at Chin Technologies began malfunctioning whenever Samuel was in sensitive areas. The most serious threat came on a Tuesday evening in late November. Samuel was leaving the federal building after a briefing when 2 men approached him in the parking garage. They were professional, polite, and absolutely terrifying. "Mr. Washington," the taller man said, "you're causing problems for important people. We strongly suggest you reconsider your cooperation with federal authorities." Samuel stood his ground, drawing on decades of dignity in the face of intimidation. "I've been threatened by better men than you," he said calmly. "And I've spent 34 years waiting for the chance to do the right thing again." The men left without violence, but their message was clear. Samuel called David immediately, and within hours, both men were under federal protection. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in January 2024. Marcus Liu had assembled a team of the most expensive corporate defense attorneys money could buy, led by the legendary Hamilton Cross, a man who had never lost a high-stakes white-collar case. David's legal team was smaller but determined, supported by federal prosecutors who had built an overwhelming case based on Samuel's evidence and investigation. The contrast in the courtroom was stark: Marcus's team in $1,000 suits, David supported by federal attorneys and an elderly black janitor whose testimony would prove crucial. Hamilton Cross's opening strategy was predictable: attack Samuel's credibility while portraying Marcus as a victim of a vindictive partnership dispute. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Cross said in his opening statement, "the prosecution's case relies heavily on the testimony of a man who was convicted of corporate fraud 34 years ago and has spent decades working as a janitor because no one else would trust him." When Samuel took the stand, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Cross approached him with the confidence of a predator facing easy prey. "Mr. Washington," Cross began, "you've been working as a janitor for 15 years. What qualifications do you have to understand complex patent law or quantum computing technology?" Samuel's response was calm and devastating. "I have a degree in aerospace engineering from Tuskegee University and 12 years of experience at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I've worked on satellite communication systems and deep space missions. Quantum computing is actually less complex than orbital mechanics." Cross's confidence faltered slightly. "But you were convicted of fraud and couldn't find work in your field." "I was framed for the same type of corporate fraud that Mr. Liu has committed against Mr. Chin," Samuel replied. "The difference is that this time, we have the evidence to prove it." For the next 3 hours, Samuel methodically dismantled Marcus's claims with the precision of an engineer and the patience of someone who had waited 34 years for vindication. He explained the mathematical impossibilities in Marcus's story, the technical inconsistencies in the stolen algorithms, and the corporate fraud patterns that were identical to schemes he had uncovered decades earlier. But the most powerful moment came when Samuel presented the recordings from the executive conference room meetings. As Marcus's voice filled the courtroom, explicitly discussing market manipulation and patent fraud, the jury's expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to outrage. Cross attempted to attack the recordings as illegally obtained, but federal prosecutors established that Samuel had legitimate access to all areas of the building as part of his janitorial duties. More importantly, the recordings had led to the discovery of additional evidence that confirmed every aspect of the conspiracy. The turning point came when Thomas Brennan, the corrupt patent examiner, took the stand as a prosecution witness. Facing his own federal charges, Brennan testified that Marcus had paid him $200,000 to manipulate patent filings and had promised additional payments as the conspiracy succeeded. As Brennan described the systematic corruption of the patent process, Samuel caught David's eye across the courtroom. In that moment, both men understood that they had achieved something neither could have accomplished alone: the complete exposure of a system that protected the powerful at the expense of truth. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Marcus Liu was convicted on 17 counts of patent fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy. His co-conspirators, including 3 board members and 2 government officials, received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years in federal prison. But the legal victory was only the beginning of the transformation. As news of Samuel's role in exposing the conspiracy spread, offers began pouring in from technology companies, law firms, and federal agencies. The 68-year-old janitor who had been invisible for 34 years suddenly found himself in extraordinary demand. Chin Technologies, now free from Marcus's manipulation and strengthened by the vindication, offered Samuel the position of Chief Security Officer, with responsibility for protecting intellectual property and preventing corporate espionage. The salary was $400,000 annually, with stock options that would make him a millionaire within 2 years. But Samuel's most meaningful offer came from an unexpected source. NASA reached out through intermediaries, offering him a consulting position reviewing security protocols and fraud prevention systems. The same organization that had destroyed his career 34 years earlier now wanted his expertise to prevent similar injustices. David watched his friend and partner grapple with these opportunities from the executive suite at Chin Technologies, which he had reclaimed as CEO. The company's value had not only recovered but increased, as investors recognized the strength of leadership that had survived such a sophisticated attack. "What are you thinking?" David asked as they stood in his office, looking out at the San Francisco Bay. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm thinking about all the people like me," he finally said. "People who work service jobs, who get overlooked, who have knowledge and insights that nobody asks for." David nodded, understanding immediately. "You want to create something." "I want to create a foundation," Samuel said. "The Washington Institute for Corporate Justice. A place where workers at every level can report fraud, corruption, and abuse without fear of retaliation. Where someone's job title doesn't determine whether their voice gets heard." David smiled. "How much do you need?" $20 million to start," Samuel said. "Enough to hire investigators, lawyers, and advocates who will take these cases seriously." "Done," David said without hesitation. "Chin Technologies will provide the initial funding." "But Samuel, I want you to understand something. You saved more than my company. You showed me what I had been blind to for 15 years. Can you believe the courage it took for Samuel to step forward after decades of being overlooked? What would you do if you discovered evidence of massive corporate fraud? Would you speak up or stay silent? Comment number 1 if you'd risk everything for justice like Samuel, or number 2 if you think the personal cost is too high. And if this story of an unlikely partnership overcoming impossible odds inspires you, smash that subscribe button for more incredible true stories of people who refuse to give up. 6 months later, the transformation was complete in ways that neither man could have imagined. The Washington Institute for Corporate Justice occupied 3 floors in a modern building in downtown San Francisco, staffed by lawyers, investigators, and advocates who specialized in protecting workers from corporate retaliation. Samuel's office on the 20th floor had a view of the bay, but he had insisted on keeping a small janitorial closet in the building's basement. "To remember where I came from," he explained to puzzled visitors. "And to remind myself that dignity doesn't depend on floor numbers." The Institute's first year was remarkably successful. They had exposed fraud at 6 major corporations, protected dozens of whistleblowers from retaliation, and recovered over $200 million in stolen wages and benefits for workers across various industries. But Samuel's most important work happened in the evenings, when he would visit the janitorial staff at Chin Technologies and other buildings around the city. He would sit with them during their breaks, listen to their concerns, and encourage them to speak up when they saw wrongdoing. "You have more power than you know," he would tell them. "You see everything, you have access everywhere, and most importantly, you understand what's really happening because you're not distracted by corporate politics." David, meanwhile, had transformed Chin Technologies into a model of corporate responsibility. He implemented anonymous reporting systems, created worker representation on the board of directors, and established profit-sharing programs that ensured every employee, from janitors to engineers, benefited from the company's success. The quantum AI technology that Marcus had tried to steal became the foundation for breakthrough medical devices that diagnosed diseases years earlier than previously possible. The patents were held in a public trust, ensuring that life-saving innovations would be available worldwide regardless of economic status. 1 year after the trial, David and Samuel stood together in the same boardroom where their partnership had begun. But now the room was filled with employees from every level of the company, celebrating Chin Technologies' certification as the first major corporation to achieve the Washington Institute's Ethical Workplace designation. A year ago, David addressed the assembled crowd. "I thought I knew everything about leadership and business success. I was wrong about almost everything. The most important lesson I learned came from someone I had overlooked for 15 years. He turned to Samuel, who stood nearby in a tailored suit but still wore his original Chin Technologies employee badge from 2008. "Samuel Washington taught me that wisdom doesn't come from corner offices or advanced degrees. It comes from paying attention, caring about justice, and having the courage to act when others won't." Samuel stepped forward to address the crowd. 15 years ago, I was just another invisible worker in this building. But Mr. Chin showed me something equally important, that sometimes the people with power are willing to listen if you give them the chance. He paused, looking around the room at faces that represented every department and level of the company. The miracle wasn't that a janitor became successful. The miracle was that we learned to see each other as human beings instead of job titles. As the celebration continued around them, David and Samuel stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of San Francisco stretched out below them, each one representing lives and dreams and struggles that most people in power never bothered to notice. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on that boardroom door?" David asked. Samuel considered the question. "I think about it every day. Not with regret, but with gratitude. I spent 34 years learning patience, observing, understanding how systems really work. When the moment came, I was ready." David nodded. "And I spent 15 years building something I thought was successful, but I was building it blind. I needed someone who could see what I couldn't." They stood in comfortable silence, two men whose lives had been fundamentally changed by their willingness to look beyond surface appearances and social expectations. The billionaire had learned to see the human being behind the job title. The janitor had reclaimed his voice and his dignity. But their story was just beginning. The Washington Institute was expanding nationally, with plans to open offices in 10 major cities within 2 years. Samuel had been invited to testify before Congress about corporate fraud prevention. David was working with other CEOs to implement similar transparency and accountability measures across Silicon Valley. Most importantly, their partnership had inspired other unlikely collaborations. Stories were emerging from around the country of executives and service workers finding common ground, of knowledge being shared across traditional hierarchies, of justice being served by people who refused to accept that their voices didn't matter. "You know what the real miracle is?" Samuel said as they prepared to rejoin the celebration. "What's that?" This was never about one company or one case of fraud. It was about proving that every person has value, regardless of where they work or what they look like or how society has labeled them. Samuel smiled. And now that lesson is spreading. As they walked back into the boardroom, David reflected on the profound truth of Samuel's words. The miracle hadn't been supernatural. It had been the power of human potential finally being recognized and unleashed. The old black janitor had indeed become the billionaire's only hope. But in saving David's company, Samuel had done something far more important. he had proven that America's greatest resource wasn't technology or capital or innovation. It was the untapped wisdom and dignity of people who had been overlooked for too long. What's the most important lesson from Samuel and David's story? Is it that we should never judge someone by their job title, or that persistence and dignity eventually pay off? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this miracle story of transformation and unlikely friendship moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of people who changed their lives and the lives of others. And share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their current situation doesn't define their worth or their potential. Remember, sometimes the person with the mop is actually the person with the miracle. Thank you for watching, and never stop believing in the power of human potential. The camera slowly pans the Chin Technologies building from the basement where Samuel once worked alone to the executive floors where he now shapes corporate policy, while soft music plays. In offices around the world, janitors and security guards and administrative assistants watch Samuel's story and remember that they too have voices worth hearing, knowledge worth sharing, and dreams worth pursuing. In a world that often judges by appearances, Samuel Washington and David Chin proved that miracles happen when we see the person behind the position. Sometimes the greatest transformations come not from changing who we are, but from finally being seen for who we've always been. From mop to miracle. From invisible to indispensable. From overlooked to honored. Samuel Washington's journey reminds us that everyone deserves a chance to show their true worth, and that sometimes the most powerful partnerships are formed between people who have everything to learn from each other. The miracle continues in boardrooms and break rooms across America, wherever someone decides to look beyond job titles and see the human potential that has been waiting for recognition all along.